Thank you, Mr. President. It gives me the greatest pleasure to stand and lend my voice in support of this bill and to share with this honorable chamber some of my views as it relates to education and, to a lesser extent, the youth. It is the view of the Ministry of Education that it is really only through education that we as a country can achieve our developmental goals. And the Prime Minister, in her speech, her overarching theme was stay the course. And what I've found is that certainly from independence onward, successive governments have made education a priority in this country. And I'm heartened that our current Prime Minister continues to see education as a priority and as a vehicle that has taken many a poor man, many a poor persons living in communities like the one where I'm from. It's given these persons the opportunity to educate themselves, to afford a proper education. I'm using the term proper right now, being very, what do you say, conservative. Now, I heard some asides there from somewhere on the eastern, northern side, northwestern side of the table, and made a good point that the last administration, the Democratic administration, unlike previous administrations, for some reason did not see the need or the importance of education as a driver of this country's economy. And they basically kick down the ladder, as the proverbial ladder, as they say. But when they stopped paying tuition fees for Barbadian students at the University of the West Indies. And by doing so, took away something that was fundamental to the development of this country. I think, in my humble opinion, I think it was one of the most savage attacks on the people of Barbados, especially women, young women. Because I don't know if you know this, the vast majority of persons that had to drop out of university because they could no longer afford to pay those fees, tuition fees, were young women. Between the ages of, let's say 25 and maybe 40, a number of them young, single parents. Women that work in civil service, women that were all they were trying to do was to get that certification, get that degree so they could move up in their respective jobs. That's all they were trying to do. And when the previous administration imposed those fees, tuition fees, it literally pulled the rug out from under these women. I mean, a lot of young men too. But especially the women suffered the most. Because we can see the trends as it relates to women in education. A lot of women are seeing the benefits of educating themselves. And because of the economic circumstance that prevailed in Barbados at that time and continue, a lot of women could not afford to pay $30,000, $33,000 to go and get a degree. at the university. Just couldn't afford it. I mean, it was a simple choice. You're either going to look for some place to live or get a degree. And if the choice was to choose between those two, most persons would try to at least secure some place to live or support their families, whatever the case may be. So a lot of young women had to drop out of the university. And I was a young lecturer at the time. I often tell people this. I taught a class that averaged about 40 to 45 students up to 2014. Man, 2015, class dropped down to 12. Down to 12 to 13 students were in the class. Many Barbadians had to drop out from the university. And the few are the ones that remain. Many of them had to struggle to pay those fees. Struggle to pay those fees. Many days you will find class with an enrollment of, let's say, 22 students. You see now 9 students in there because the other 10 or 11 students were out working. Had to work because they know they had to pay those fees at the end of the month. So even though they were still able to secure funding to get into university, they could not afford to stay in the classroom in some cases and benefit from the classes because they could not afford to be away from work. And another thing that happened too is that a lot of them, in some cases, were locked out of the e-learning portal that they use at university. Because unless you paid your fees, the structure they had there, unless you pay your fees, you cut out the e-learning. You could not access the notes. So they still could not benefit from the education, even though they were there. And you can't blame the university for that because each and every one of those students represented a tiny bit of revenue for the university that was cash-strapped and desperate at the time. A lot of persons, lecturers like myself, got sent home too. We could talk about that. Part-time lecturers got sent home. So it was a devastating blow all round. All round. But what I think was most devastating, though, it was that a lot of people had to defer their dreams. A lot of people had to defer their dreams. I mean, most persons who come to school nowadays, they, aspire to go on to university. But then all of a sudden we had a situation in Barbados where people could not imagine how they would get to university. How am I going to get to university? Where before we almost saw it as an entitlement. You go to secondary school, if you do well, you go on to BCC, or you may go straight to university. But under the previous administration, somehow all that went through the window. And it happened at a time when people in rural communities, especially St. Andrew, Belle Plaine, Orange Hill, understood the importance of education. When I first went to university in 2002, it took me about 3 or 4 years walking around that university before I saw somebody that I recognized, I didn't see a fellow I recognized down there. But by 5 or 6 years, and I started seeing people from my community. Poor people like me from my community started coming down to the university and taking advantage of the education that was being made available. So when this government came into office in 2018, one of the first things that the Honourable Prime Minister, she affirmed was that she was going to reverse this devastating policy or restore free tertiary education to Barbadian students at University of the West Indies. But she went a little further. Students who were doing degrees at Erdeston and those who were doing degrees at BCC, they too were able to do these programs free of cost. Now, on July 25th, my Honourable Minister, the Minister of Education, technological and vocational training. Santia Bradshaw, she went down in the other place and articulated that policy in Parliament. And in doing so, brought Barbados right back to even keel, where the wealthy among us and the poor among us all had that equal opportunity to go and get an education, which we all understand is the great equalizer in this life. Great equalizer. And reverse what was definitely a trend at university, because in that first year, by 2015 or so, enrollment was down by 12%. And climbing or continuing to drop and drop and drop and drop. The percentage was climbing, the numbers were going down. But very quickly you started to see, well now, it's 2018, 2019 core, you can see a slight increase. Because it just happened last year, so it's going to take a little bit now for persons to readjust themselves. Because in the last 4 years, people took university education right out of the equation. They couldn't imagine how they were going to get it, how they were going to finance it. So they moved on with their lives. And then when it came back last year, it just couldn't just readjust just like that. So it's going to take a little time. So I suspect that within the next 2 years or so, we're going to see more and more persons being enrolled in the university. And I'm very thankful for our Prime Minister for committing to that. Just like the good senator on the other side. Promise made, promise kept. People could not imagine where we were going to find the money in excess of $90 million a year or so to pay for university for Barbadian students and universities across this Caribbean and down there at KFL. They just couldn't imagine how we're going to get it. But I know the Prime Minister found a way, and she continues to find a way, because she realized the importance of education to this country, the development of this country, the importance. So I'm heartened by that. And the fact that she continues this support, even in this budget, and the amount of money that was allocated to education tells us that education and healthcare are, she's seen as important elements within any society that intends to progress. There must be adequate health care, and there must be a sound education system in place. And I think that in the Ministry of Education, I think that we've done well to ensure that our education system remains competitive and remains sound. In her presentation, Mr. President, the Prime Minister mentioned the importance of second language, the importance of speaking a second language. And I think what happens with a second language, we as English speakers in the Anglophone Caribbean, we don't realize how locked off, how trapped we are within this Anglophone space. We don't even hear news that comes out of the Francophone or the French-speaking, Spanish-speaking countries. It's like we're isolated down here. We're the minority down here in this part of the world. In the Americas, we're the minority. There are more Spanish speakers in the Americas than there are in English, barring North America and North America, United States, and Canada in North America, because Mexico is also in North America. In this part of the Caribbean, we are the minority in terms of the amount of persons who speak English. Well, there are between 6 and 9 million of us. And there are millions more, probably more Spanish speakers in Cuba than in the entire Caribbean region, including Jamaica, which has just over 2 to 3 million. But we don't even hear about news coming out of these other territories, these huge territories, because of the language barrier. So, it's funny how language divides us down here. So, even if there were employment opportunities in Dominican Republic or in Martinique or in French Guiana, where I've probably never met anybody who visited that place, we would not even hear about it because of the language barrier. So, the Prime Minister realized that it is important to be able to speak another language, and as persons surrounded by by Spanish speakers and French speakers. We should be speaking with a greater degree of fluency another language. But what the university has done, because they realize the importance of not only the traditional language, but these modern languages or these future languages that are being spoken, they are working towards putting in place a program that would see young persons between the ages of, let's say, 11 to 18 years old being exposed to Mandarin, or what some people refer to as Chinese, to the CSC level, or to the CAPE level, CSET or CAPE level. So they're putting a program in place where they would train, not only would they be teaching the CSC Mandarin, but they also would train teachers to be in a position to teach it as well. So you have that. So you have that internationalization of that department of language in this country, where you have people realize there's a need, and the university is willing to work hand in glove with the Ministry of Education to ensure that persons can be exposed to that language, whereby they can then navigate this world with greater ease and be exposed to spaces that hitherto they would have been barred from because of their lack of the ability to speak a second language. So I think that is that's a direction I think that we should go as a country, try to incorporate as much as possible the language and the culture of a developmental partner of a country that we know is going places. It's going to be one of the foremost countries in the world before we know it anyway. So the fact that if we have persons who can speak the language, then we have a different market now that we can send our people to go and work and come back here with minds expanded, perhaps send back some foreign exchange, and so on and so forth. So I really commend the university for that initiative, working hand in hand with the Ministry of Education, because the reality is that we can't do it all. We don't have the capacity to do all of the research and do all of the teaching that is needed to bring us up to standard. Mr. President, I just want to mention briefly Ross University, because, I mean, that university, people talk about the $50 or $60 million in foreign exchange that it would pump into the economy. But I see beyond that. I mean, it has provided over 1,000 jobs for Barbadians, either in the construction sector and persons working within the village and the university itself. But I think what is even more important is that when people see that a university of that magnitude, a university of that caliber, deciding to domicile here in Barbados, I guess it more or less give other universities the confidence, or it gives us the opportunity to invite other universities here. And the fact that we have, I mean, we had other universities here before. We had other universities here before, but none of this caliber, you see. And it aligns well with our view of seeing Barbados as a hub for education. A hub for education in the region, and perhaps in the world. But when universities like Ross set up here, I'm sure that there are other universities looking on from the outside and perhaps think that they could perhaps set it here too. Right? Also, what's important is the foreign exchange that they bring. Even our University of the West Indies, our medical program has been accredited. And what that has done with the accreditation is that now they can attract students from all over the world, especially from in North America, who would not be able to come here and study before, because unless your university is accredited, then you cannot use that university as a source as a way of securing funds. The lending agencies in the States are not going to give you money to go and study in an overseas university that is not accredited. So having accreditation now means that the university now can now earn some foreign exchange by attracting more foreign students to our shores. So that's another good thing. So I see a win-win situation coming out of this, what the university is doing at KFIL and what Ross being here, what that has also achieved. And I've had the opportunity to go, I work with the Ross University in the background from its inception. It was in the background for the most part, but I was there. And I had the opportunity to see the layout of the place. And I must tell you, I've never been to a medical school before, but I was impressed by what I saw. And from what I'm told, that place operates on the cutting edge of technology. Cutting edge. And with that, I know that in itself will attract even more persons to want to come here and study in Barbados. So the future looks great. You see some budding shoots as a result of what these two tertiary educational facilities are doing. Additionally, the government of Barbados is looking to partner with Ross, the Chamberlain College of Nursing, which is that is really a subsidiary of the same Talem Group Global Education, which is the mother company to Ross, right? And they're partnering with this nursing group to assist our nurses, because we recognize that some of our nurses were experiencing some challenges, especially with the regional exams. So any kind of synergies we can leverage by working with Chamberlain School of Nursing, College of Nursing, sorry, we welcome. Because another thing that Barbados would like to do, because in the past, anybody that grew up in the 50s, 60s, or have heard their parents say that we exported teachers. We exported trained persons. That's what Barbados is known for throughout the region, for exporting trained persons, skilled persons throughout this region, throughout this Caribbean. Where there was a deficiency, you would look to Barbados for your trained staff, skilled persons. And now, if we can build capacity through the help of Chamberlain and PCC, we can, at some point, perhaps be exporting nurses again, exporting nurses. Same way we had to import nurses from Philippines and from Nigeria and those places over the years, we could do the reverse now and export. So, as I said, the future looks very bright for Barbados as it relates to education and educational tourism on both sides. We're going to see a lot of that going forward. I mean, someone was telling me, I don't get up on the South Coast too often, but someone made the point to me that since Ross University came here to Barbados, being St. Lawrence Gap, like it came back to life. You should. St. Lawrence Gap, pick back up businesses over there, pick back up up in Oistins. I mean, Oistins was always lively, but it's even more lively now. Because you have those 9-month tourists, as the Prime Minister referred to them. They are going there, they're patronizing, they're taking in what Barbados has to offer. I see them riding all the way down St. Andrew. I saw them down in St. Andrew. Miles away from Coverley, but they come down to St. Andrew to enjoy what we have to offer. And we have a lot to offer, St. Andrew. I'm just saying. All of St. Andrew. Come down to Belle Plaine. Catch you orange show. Yeah, so I'm just saying that I just raised the point that if we were to strangle these types of institutions, there's a lot that we stand up to lose a lot. So the fact that the Prime Minister has thrown her support behind the university, behind Ross coming here, because I understand there were other persons who were interested, or there were other places that Ross might have identified that they would have wanted to set up, but because of the astute leadership and the forward-leaning and forward-thinkingness of our, well, you could call it back race. You could call it what you want. Yes. They set up here, and they were happy. I could do that. They were happy because I was on the tour when they came for the first time, some of the administrators, and they were behind me having the perfect conversation. They were impressed. They were blown away by the facilities that we have here. Blown away. It's not anything that somebody told me. I heard them. I heard the conversation, so I know that they were impressed by what we have here, by what they saw when they came here. So I can see a long and fruitful relationship brewing. So, all right, so I'm going to move on quickly. Come starting from tertiary, I'm going to work my way down, perhaps down to primary or maybe nursery if I can. But I'm coming down. I'm coming down. We're looking at tertiary education, but we're going to look a little bit at occupational training, which still falls under tertiary education. You may or may not be aware that in the Ministry of Education, we have adopted 2 departments from the Ministry of Labor. We have 2 babies in the Ministry of Education. The Barbados Vocational Training Board and the Tibet Council. And I think that they've really come home because education is a lifelong goal now. It's a lifelong process now. It's not when you get a job, you go in and learn what you need to learn for that job, and then that's it. No, it's a continuous thing. And under education, we push continuous learning. So perhaps it was best, and the Prime Minister, she's brilliant, you know. She saw the wisdom in bringing TECVOC under education. And I believe, and I would say this, that TECVOC, I know that the senator there on the other side said that the Foreign Affairs Ministry is the driver of this economy and the transformational engine of this economy. And maybe that's true. But I believe TECVOC, going forward, TECVOC will be the driver of this economy. Technical and vocational training. Technical and vocational training. And we see, when we think about TECVOC, we think about, a little bit of perhaps skill training, so the mechanics maybe fixing a AC or something like that. But no, you need to understand that we need to make it clear to persons in Barbados that the surgeon who's operating that machine that's going to fix your heart and operate on you, he does TECVOC as well. And we're going to need people to fix those machines, just like we're going to need people to fix those electric buses when they come here. Yes, all of that comes under TECVOC. And I will tell you what was told to me, what I told someone just this week, that the days of the greasy mechanic, those days are disappearing. In fact, they've already started to disappear. You see a young mechanic lately? Young mechanic, clean. You know, he has a computer now, and he's gonna plug that into your vehicle. He's gonna diagnose the problem and deal with it from there. Greasy, dirty mechanic. That's a thing of the past. So TECVOC is not that dirty job that it used to be. You know, so and we need to put that out there. And we need to make people understand that it's not even a second chance. Education, like what was believed in the past. You know, it's believed that if you didn't learn anything, you could probably go and learn a trade. That's what they tell you in school. If you don't learn, if you can't do academics, you can't think. You gotta learn a trade. Learn some carpentry or joinery or masonry, tiling, something like that. No, we gotta move away from that way of thinking. And understand that TECVOC is just as important. I was on my way to give a talk at, it was an ECA graduation. And I gave a man a ride in my car. A fellow from the community, I gave him a ride. And I told him where it was going. And he told me, oh yes, I know of that ECA farm program. And he told me he saw on TV, I didn't see her myself. He saw on TV a young lady that was studying, she was either studying to be a lawyer or she wanted to be a lawyer. But then she got exposed to this farm program in the summer. And after the program, said, no, I wanted to be a lawyer at first, but after doing this program, I realized that agriculture is my true calling. And there's a need for agriculture. There's a need for these types of skills in Barbados where we can have people with the skill set that would be able to get more out of less. Because we don't have as much land as we had before to use for agriculture. A lot of the land is being taken out in residential and commercial, for commercial use. So now you have to extract a lot more, because we still have to feed ourselves, from a lot less. So there's that. So I'm glad that a person can see that their role is just as important as a lawyer or a doctor. I mean, no offense to lawyers and doctors in the Honourable Chamber, but I don't think that you guys are the ones who are going to be driving this economy going forward. I mean, we need you to treat us when we're not well, but it's a different type of skill set that we need now to push this country forward. And the doctors and lawyers are not the ones. I dare say, TECVOC, technical and vocational training, is what's going to push us to the next level. And as I said, we adopted these two children because there's a intrinsic link between education and labor. It's a link. You understand? And you know, there's the argument which informs which. Does education inform labor, or labor inform education? The argument can go on forever and ever. But some of the trends, because we talk about global trends in education, we look at global trends. Because one of the things I discovered after going to ministry is that a lot of what we're doing here is in line with what is happening globally. We are right up there. Sometimes even ahead of many other jurisdictions because of the, you know, the forward thinking and the forward leaning of our leaders. What we have found, though, is that persons who have, and it's a fact, persons who have little access to quality education are the ones who tend to wallow in poverty and who are the most vulnerable and who find themselves the most precarious or dangerous, low-paying jobs. And that's what keeps them in that cycle of poverty. And it's funny, though, because in Barbados, and I'm sure the same is true across the region, that we have so many people unemployed, so many young people can't find a job, but yet you can hear industry, and that's how they say it in education, industry, not the industry complaining that they don't have persons to work. But yet we have hundreds, if not thousands of persons home unemployed. They can't find a job because they don't have the necessary skills. And the fact is, the nature of work is changing, where the employer wants someone with a certain amount of skills or a certain skill set to perform that duty or to work for him. And in education, in SJPA, in the institutions, these tertiary institutions, SJPA, Barbados Vocational Training Board, they are realigning their curriculum. They are realigning their offerings to meet the demands of industry. Because that's how you have to think. If the country is going in a particular direction, you have to recalibrate. You have to tweak your system so that you be churning out the type of employees or the type of person or your workforce, type of workforce that industry needs. So right now we're going into the fourth industrial revolution. We're in it. This is a technological revolution. It's about technology now. So we have to get a lot of technical people out there if they're innovative enough, they will build things. If not, they'll fix things. But they have to have the skill set in order to function. So that's what we're doing at Polytechnic. And they will tell you that they're tweaking the curriculum so as we would got the necessary skill set, the right persons. They're training our people. They're retraining these people. Because they recognize they have to retrain their people as well. So their people could then in turn teach these young cohort of students to and equip them with the necessary tools or necessary skills to go out there and be productive. You know, I attended it was an opening ceremony of the still quite polytechnic, but it's SJPA, is Technical Institute now. And one of the things that came out was that some of the new technologies that they want to add to their offerings. You know, we're looking at things like artificial intelligence. We're looking at things like 3D printing. These are things that the Prime Minister would have identified that we should focus on. So they are refocusing, basically. And looking at things that may not, you mean, oh yes, I slipped my mind, so I was trying to think I'll come back. And the point was made at this ceremony that the person that we are training now, the employee, the workforce that we are training now, we are training them for jobs that have not yet been invented. We are equipping them with the skills for jobs that are 10 years into the future, 5 years into the future. On stream, they just have to plug in and play. But they have to have the necessary skill set. And that's what we are doing. So we're working, that's how we're looking to the future. We're not training people for jobs that already exist to fix things. We've gone past that. We're looking to train persons for jobs that are yet to be defined. Yet to be defined. That's how we're thinking. That's how we have to think if we are to stay current or stay relevant in this competitive environment. So the ministry is playing its part. And they're through SJPA, through BBTV, TVET Council, they're positioning Barbadians, positioning young people in this country to be ready for that next wave, that next revolution in terms of work. Yeah, robotics is another thing that we're looking at. Robotics. But not only in SJPA and BBTV, they're doing that in schools as well. We are introducing children to coding and robotics in school at this tender age because we realize that there's going to be a market for that. There's going to be a need for that type of skill set later on in the future. Maybe not yet, maybe they don't see it now. But you know, why we're about technology, you can take one of these fancy dancy phones or these iPads that we got here, and there's technology on there that we didn't even know that we needed. There are things on there that someone taught about 10 or 15 years ago, and we go and we say, you know what, this is a good idea. You know? We didn't even realize that we needed something like this. We didn't realize that, you know what, we should be able to take a pen and write on the screen just like we were writing on a piece of paper and take notes. Somebody thought about that. Maybe, I'm sure that's technology is about maybe 5 or 6 years old. Someone thought about that. That's how you have to think. That's how if a country is to remain relevant, remain current, that's how it has to think. It can't be thinking about now, what's going on now. You got to think in the future. So, having said that, I'm heartened by the support shown by the PM to strengthen the technical and vocational offerings in our tertiary institutes. And by that, I am referring also to the, and it's going to talk about it in secondary school systems, but it's in tertiary as well. The CVQs and the MVQs. If Senator Honourable was here, she would tell you, because I spoke at her graduation, Small Business Association, where persons graduated with MVQs. Certification that they could travel through this entire Carriacon region and be certified and find employment. We talk about the contingent rights bill in here. I didn't get a chance to speak. But if I had spoken, I would have spoken about that. The fact that persons now can now travel through this region and work and be certified with a qualification, a certification that people recognize. and people respect. And I'm glad to see the type of respect that the CVQs are gaining, the prominence that they are gaining in this country and this region. I wasn't there, but persons told me that CXC went through a similar struggle. In the early days, CXC had to struggle with City and Guilds and all these other examining bodies from external examining bodies before it could be established here in this country as a legitimate certification. And CVQ, for some reason, they don't seem to be going through that much resistance, and that's good. It's good. Because what I'm seeing is that the standards are being raised, and they're becoming higher and higher and higher, better and better and better. So when you leave any of these institutions in Barbados with a CVQ, you are well qualified, proper qualified. And when they talk to the directors of TVET, BVTV, and principal over at SJPI, these people are passionate about education and technical education in this country. They're passionate. And they go where they need to go. Speak to who they need to speak to, just so that bring who they need to bring to ensure that we are always on the cutting edge. That we will not be left behind. I just want to put that out there. So the support that I'm seeing, I know the support is there from the Prime Minister, because she mentioned it. And she realized too that SJPI, BCC, BVTV, they're going to have to be on the forefront of this retraining exercise that we're going to embark on. Because we're not just going to retrain persons to go and sit in the office and push a pen, paper. No, we retrain them with skills for the future, which happens to be the name of a program that I'm going to segue into, that's in the schools, a little bit in the tertiary institutions, but in the schools too, where the focus at the technical institutes is on the hard skills or the technical skills. In the secondary schools, a lot of focus is now being placed on soft skills, because we understand that there's a need for soft skills in the school. Now, what are soft skills? One might ask. Let me tell you. Those basic manners and such like that you need to function with other people. There's some people who just don't, you spend their time with them, they have no training. Be educated, not be pretty. But Mali, sorry, Mr. President, they are mannerly. I have no training, they lack basic soft skills. And I'm just going to run through some that I have listed here and try to tell them in as to why they are important, especially for our young people going into the world of work, why these type of skills are important, why the ministry places so much resources into ensuring that these things are taught in schools, because there's no, on the curriculum, there's nothing called soft skills. You know, if you don't be careful, you could go through your entire school life. Unless you but a teacher who's into those kind of things, you would never learn about soft skills. You might 5 years in secondary school, you may never know, all through primary school, you may never know it. You may have to learn these things on your job, and I don't think the ideal place to learn soft skills is on the job. You should know those things going in. Things like communication. Communication, you realize, is not about calling big words. We had a prime minister in this country call a lot of big words, low frequency words. They weren't always big, but they were low frequency, meaning not many people used them. Not many people understood them. Not many people cared to hear them. And that's not communicating. If you're communicating just for a few persons to understand you and using esoteric type language, then that's not communicating. You must be able to communicate in a tone, in a style, according to your audience, that your audience can comprehend and understand what you are saying. You must be able to give instructions in clear language that they understand. If you fail to do that, then you're not communicating. So if you aspire to be a leader, you must have that particular soft skill, communication. You must be self-motivated. It's important that we teach our young people to be self-motivated, because if you're not self-motivated, then what you'll be an eye servant. You know the old people talk about eye servant, our grandparents talk about eye servants. Don't be an eye servant. You can only work when somebody who's looking at you and somebody watching you. That's a serious thing. Because with the technology that you have now, you might think the boy ain't watching you. You understand? You may think so. But they watching you. You understand? If he say, look at you, they watch you, he jump up and pay, you know? Look like if he's doing something, we think he's fooling. No. It must be, you know, instill in you that you must be self-motivated. You have something to do, you get it and do it. You don't need a boy come and get behind you with a whip to push you to work. That's laziness. No. Get up and do what you have to do. And that's something we have to teach our children. Our children must learn the importance of being self-motivated. And having that positive attitude. Having that, something, I worked at NTW years ago, and there was this officer over there, a depot, said, use the initiative, man. You understand? Use the initiative. Don't everything you got to go and ask the supervisor what to do. No. You got to learn, use the initiative. Think things through and operate to suit. So you become a proper worker. They must learn some leadership. Leadership skills also you need to be able to learn some leadership and some responsibility. It's amazing you could become a prime minister in this country and never learn any leadership skills. And don't be a proper leader. You could be you could be a prime minister and never learn how to be responsible. It happens. You can't ever be serious. But yes, it's an important skill. Leadership is an important skill. Know how to manage other people. Manage other people's expectations. That's the difficulty, you know, managing people's expectations. And once you get that, you have that covered, you're pretty good. And I'm going to go through them a little quicker because there is one that I want to spend just a few minutes on before I move on to something else. And that is problem solving. Problem solving. And I'm going to tie that into what we have in schools, which is conflict resolution. We have a lot of problems in school with conflict, and I'm going to look at some problems we have with conflict resolution in school. We have some serious issues with violence in schools that I want to address, but I want to address the positive before I get to the negative. But you need to learn how to think critically. You need to learn how to solve problems as a leader. These are things that we need to teach our children. And if it can't be taught within the regular syllabus, then you have to teach it by you know, the programs that we have in the ministry. We had the Aganar program that tried to teach soft skills through sports, which was a good idea. It was a wonderful idea. And I'm glad that it is continuing. It's going to pick back up maybe perhaps in the no academic year, but it's continuing because I felt it was a interesting way to get to people. Because sometimes you can't teach everybody or every child in this classroom style teaching environment. You just can't. Some people will not learn in that environment. You're wasting time with some children. You have to in classroom for a whole day, telling them things, using a tone that they don't understand, using language that they don't understand, even though it's English. But they don't understand it when it comes from your mouth. And you think you're getting through to them, but you're not. So suddenly you use other methods. And this was I think was an interesting method, probably first piloted in South America. Work over there, brought here, and working here too. And I know a number of children that can attest to having learned a lot through that program. And I toured with Spring Counseling. I don't think you mind me referring to him, to his organization here in this honorable place. I toured with him and I saw some of the sessions and what they were doing. They're teaching children about conflict resolution, think about life skills. They think, you know, like, you live in a community, there are drugs in your community, blocks in your community, weed selling, you know, you have your street entrepreneurs is what I called them when I was a teacher. Street entrepreneur. Yeah, that's street. Yeah, they operate on the corners. Yeah, it's street, road entrepreneur. And you see them, but you don't. They see them, but unless your parents tell you about them or give you the alternative side to it, children don't know. So you have now to learn, because they will see how on the street sometimes when you have a issue, you may have to settle it through violence. You may have to settle it through violence. You know, you don't go to a police and tell a policeman that a man carry away your thing. You can't. You know, you don't do that. So you may have to settle it another way. And children seeing this come into school and assume that that is the only way, or the best way, or even a way. So we have to put programs in place, and we have persons coming into school because teachers can't do all. They can't do it all. I mean, everybody has to pitch in. If the parents are not pulling the weight, some parents, and I'm not saying that parents aren't doing, but I mean, obviously there are some parents whose values are such that they don't see the need to tell their children, teach their children about conflict resolution. And we have persons in the school, in the system that would, and these programs, the Aganar, the Supreme Council, that would show them the way, show them the alternative. Teach them those basic life skills that would help them, that when they see these situations arising, they could circumvent them. Because other than that, they're not going to know. You know, the simple little things. I mean, I was thinking, because they talk about pregnancy and drug use, and these children, 14, 15 years, don't know anything. Some of them, they don't even know how to get pregnant. They know that you get pregnant through a process, but they don't understand the process. You understand? So they will still go and make the same mistake, even though they see their friends fall into a trap. So, but you have to sit them down and tell them certain things. And some teachers aren't comfortable sitting down telling children certain things. Because sometimes when you tell the child one thing, the child go home and tell the parent something else, and then the parent at school the next day saying that you say. You understand? So these things happen. I was a teacher, I know. You understand? I know these things happen. So some teachers are very careful what they say to children, but children need to learn these things. And some parents would not have a discussion like that, even with their child. Even if the child is 16 years old, which is just around the age that the child might even go out there and experiment with something. So there's that. All right, but I mean, as I said, I want to look at some of the positives that are happening in education. And I will look at the negative as I get near to the end here. But one of the things that I like in secondary system, and I can't talk about everything, because there are a lot of things happening, a lot of exciting things happening in education. Believe me when I say this. But the STEAM program, which used to be STEM, but now we have incorporated the arts, which aligns well with the creation of the creative economy, because we have to instill in our young people an appreciation for arts. And not only an appreciation, we must create a framework, we must create a situation where a person who pursues the arts stands just as good a chance to make a comfortable living as someone who pursues the sciences. If you understand what I'm saying. I mean, you can't have every artist being hungry and starving artist. That's what they call it, right? A starving artist, a hungry artist. You can't be like that. You must be able to make a living from your particular choice of art. If it's music, if it's painting, whatever the case may be, whatever your creative genius, wherever it takes you, it should be able to take you into a place where you could make a living from it. You can make some money from it. So I'm saying that in education, we are looking at curriculum reform in that area where we are looking to bring greater emphasis not only to the arts, but also to creating a space where persons who engage in the arts can also make a comfortable living in this country, Mr. President. And I move on quickly, because I'm still in secondary school. 5 more minutes? Wait, no, going into second gear. Yeah, we've been just, before, because I want to at least touch a little bit on the common entrance before I wrap up. Let's talk a little bit about violence in the schools. I mean, violence in schools is a real thing. A real thing. And I'm not only talking about violence as it relates to children violence. There's some children on teacher violence too, you know. There's a bit of children on teacher violence in the school, and nobody didn't tell me this. These are things that I saw when I was a teacher. And I remember, it could have been about 2012, 2011, 2012, around that time. He was a younger teacher, and he's now started teaching a few years. And I think it was the former Minister of Education. He has said something along the lines that children have rights, which is true, but never took the trouble to speak about the responsibilities that came with those rights. And a lot of children took that children have rights as an excuse to be disrespectful to teachers. And we saw a lot of that in those early years. And perhaps that disrespect is probably what grew and festered and became what we are now seeing in our streets. Because those children will be 22 and 23-year-olds that are out there engaging in violence now in the streets. So there's a possibility that there may be a link between that and this. I'm just saying, no need to quote me on that, but that was just my view. And I had that view long before I came here. Long before. So I'm just putting that out there. But we have a situation where in the schools, a number of children are from communities where there are troubled elements in the community, troubled elements. And and children seeing that, so then they bring that drama into the school setting. So it wouldn't be unusual for you to go into a school and see graffiti that reflects a particular troubled group. And notice I'm using the term troubled group, but you know what I mean. A particular troubled group from a particular community. And children wanting to more or less, if there's a conflict, they want to carry on the conflict in the school with the other persons from the other troubled groups. And you see that in schools. It happens in schools, believe it or not, it happens in schools. I mean, as a ministry, we are trying to combat it. We would have launched our anti-violence campaign last year. We still continue with our programs just to bring awareness to conflict resolution, to showing children that they can talk it out, more or less, talk it out. There's no need to reach for no sword or reach for no gun, God forbid, or any kind of weapon. You can talk these things out. So we're working towards getting some of the violence out of the schools. We're also working on some of the 1 or 2 incidents incidences of drugs and such like. We're working on those things. So, but I'm going to move on quickly because I can see that as I said, the helicopter is hovering. So I'm going to move quickly just to look at the common entrance. I'm not going to speak on the common entrance, but just want to put it out there to people in Barbados that I know there's a lot of discussion around the common entrance. A lot of people, there are people, not a lot, but there are people who would want to see the common entrance abolished. But what we have discovered in the ministry is that in many cases, the problem, you recognize it at the common entrance, but the problem was in existence long before the common entrance. We have our criterion reference test that detects these deficits in children from as early as 7 years old. Sometimes after the children do the test, if the test is done fairly, because what I've seen over the years is that a lot of parents, sometimes teachers, take the test, the children take only test, they practice it, you know, come back in and do the test, and then you get a false positive. Whereas you have a test that is testing for deficiencies, parents see that test as almost like a placement test, so they don't want the child to fail. But in actual fact, what the ministry is doing is looking for the deficits in literacy and numeracy that they can then address at a later date. But because a parent doesn't want his child to fail that test or don't want to believe that there's something wrong with his child, they then coach the child to pass the particular test, and then that deficit goes undetected. That child is sorted through the system until he's 9 years old. The test is done again, same thing is repeated. It goes as though nothing is wrong with the child has no deficiency, then the child goes and writes the exam, common entrance exam that it has never seen before, never had the opportunity to rehearse or be coached for, and fails because the child can't read so well, or maybe the child can't count so well. But these things were undetected because it was able to pass the reference test. And then what happens sometimes too, and we know this is a fact, that if you have a child in the school, in primary school, and the child is not learning anything, but is not giving any trouble neither. So they don't quit in the class, you know, not being disruptive. So you allow the child just to drift through the system. It's sad. But if you're going to be honest with yourself, you know it has happened. And those are things that we are now looking to fix in the ministry. And I have here before me a proposal by Erdeston to train teachers to be able to detect these things. Because the teachers don't know. Teachers don't always know that a child has a deficiency. You know, child may be lazy. All these things we were hearing for years. Child may be a little lazy. The child may be a little slow, but in actual fact, child has a deficiency that could be addressed, that could be identified and addressed. But if the teacher is not trained to pick it up, then you can blame the teacher for not realizing and not treating to it. But we are looking to address that, and by training our teachers to be able to identify these gaps, so that they can intervene. Because early intervention is the key. If you can fix the problem at 7 or 8, when the child get to 11 and ready to write the common entrance exam, then it better able to do so. Not wait until it gets into the secondary system with all these deficiencies, sorted through that system as well, end up out of school at 15 or 16 years old, frustrated, can't read, can't write, can't get a proper job, and then find itself in another system in front of magistrate. So you don't want that. So we're trying to address the problem at an earlier stage before the problem before it becomes a real problem. You understand? Before it gets to the final stage. I can see people looking at their watch. I know what that means. I can pick up the cue, so I'm gonna wrap up right now. There's no need for all that. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. So I just want to say that there's a lot of things are happening in the Ministry of Education to ensure the future of our young people at the highest level and at the lowest level. I mean, when I say highest level, at the latest stage and the earliest stages, we are working towards ensuring that everyone gets a fair break. And with those very few words, Mr. President, I just want to fully associate myself with all my colleagues in this honorable chamber and the other place in supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I next recognize Senator Rogers.
And I spent over a decade of my formative years growing up on the island of St. Kitts before I migrated to Barbados over 3 decades ago. And so, sir, if anyone would have told me while I walked the illustrious corridors of that wonderful institution in St. John as a schoolboy that I would one day have the opportunity to walk the hallowed walls. I said illustrious, sir. the hallowed walls of this parliament, where great men and women have gathered in every generation to collectively shape what is one of the most successful examples of social engineering, the nation of Barbados, I would have told them no. But I am here, and I'm grateful to be here. I believe this journey has enabled me to get a different perspective on this country, which I have grown to love and to which I feel indebted to forever. It also has given me the opportunity to look at its development over the past 3 decades since I've been here. And so as I speak to this bill, I wish to do so under the title, Get Back on Course. Get Back on Course. This title is in no way meant to be contrary to that by which the Honourable Prime Minister encouraged the nation to stay on course. I fully endorse the sentiments of the Honourable Prime Minister that we must stay the course, as bitter and grueling as it may seem, towards stabilization and economic recovery. However, I am cognizant, as I am certain that the Honourable Prime Minister is, and other honourable members here, that there is more to national development than economic viability. There's a socio-cultural and philosophical dimension to national development which must be in sync with economic development. If we are to make the best of the opportunities that will be available to us, having stayed the course, we must pay attention to this socio-cultural and philosophical dimension. No doubt this debate takes place at a time when there is much concern about the social state of our nation. Indeed, the happenings of the first quarter of this year perhaps have rattled even the toughest of us. At this juncture in our national history, I believe that we can all concur that sociologically, culturally, and philosophically, we have gone somewhat adrift as a people. And if the economic recovery envisaged is to be capitalized upon, we must get back on course. We must get back on course socially, culturally, and philosophically. And I dare say this is not a new call. In fact, one of our cultural icons, our cultural ambassador, Stetson Wiltshire, whom we know as the Red Plastic Bag, or RPB, said over 30 years ago in a song entitled "We Must Rebuild," 1986. He said, "We may have the biggest bank or the fanciest highway, but what if the people are getting worse every day? We may have the biggest bank or the fanciest highway, but what if the people are getting worse every day?" He would have recognized, as I am pointing out now, that there must be a gelling of the economic development and the socio-cultural and philosophical development of the nation. Mr. President, we must certainly stay the course toward economic recovery. But if we're going to experience productivity and development, we must get back on course, socially and philosophically. But what is this back on course I'm speaking about? I believe our national development, as I mentioned before, must never be divorced from the principles of which I've spoken. The principles upon which we began our journey towards self-actualization as a people. And if we take a look at this nation, just prior to independence and just after, we can get a little kernel of what this sociological, cultural, and philosophical underpinning is. From adult suffrage in 1951, under the late His Excellency Sir Grantley Adams, pushing for economic empowerment of the people, pushing for political rights of the masses, through the boldness of the late His Excellency Errol Walton Barrow, who taught us to see ourselves as no less than any other nation in this world, not to be stooges for anyone, be friends of all, and I believe we can all finish that, but satellites of none. He taught us to consider ourselves, consider what our national identity is. He challenged us that this little nation must never be at the behest of others. We will never be caught loitering on colonial premises after hours. I believe I can speak without fear. Closing time, sir. I believe I can speak without fear of being found wrong, that every leader since him, including our present leader, has upheld that latter maxim. We will not be found loitering anywhere after closing time. And so I'm very confident that even if an invitation had come, our Honourable Prime Minister would not have been found loitering in what may well have been the mudroom of a luxurious mansion in Florida, reducing the citizenry of this country to nothingness, while awaiting to meet one who has spoken in derogatory terms of persons like us. One who could not even stand up to call out what was a diabolical wrong, that in the 21st century, having expunged the rhetoric of Nazism, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, people could shout blood and soil, the theme by which Hitler and his Nazi movement ruled Germany. In addition to their excellencies, Mr. President, Sir Grantley and Sir Errol Barrow, Tom Adams taught us to think big, to dream big, that nothing is beyond us, that we can achieve anything as a nation. These are the social and philosophical underpinnings by which this nation became great. These, coupled with a frugal attitude and a frugal culture of its people, again to quote another Red Plastic Bag song of 1983, a little with content is great gain. And so, sir, it is with this philosophy, with this sociological outlook, with this cultural posture, our people pressed on toward and beyond independence, with a zeal to make this nation the greatest nation on earth. I'm sure that those who would have been around at that time can remember a teacher who would have influenced their lives, who would have gone above the call of duty to ensure that their young charge learned. I'm sure that those who were around at that time can remember the benevolent person in the village who, when they saw a young man or a young woman with potential, they supported them so that they could achieve. However, as in everything, time runs by, the danger of complacency sets in, Or perhaps we just hit the top of that sigmoid curve. And if we understand the philosophy of the sigmoid curve, when we get to the top, if we do not retool, if we do not restructure, we come down. Or it may just be the natural course of human development, where every generation seems to lower the moral standards of the one before. Similar to what a Chinese proverb says, the morals and values of a society are like a tree, which every generation comes under and finds shade. But I've also said, if each generation, under the belief that they're pruning, cuts off a branch, there will come a time when there's a generation that finds itself 96 degrees in the shade. It is quite possible that we're there now. But now is a time of opportunity. Now, as we are being encouraged to stay the course toward economic recovery, I believe it is an opportune time for us to seriously think about getting back on course, to embrace the social and philosophical principles upon which this nation was built and became great, to embrace the social and philosophical principles which propel this nation to be one that can be likened to a city on a hill. And what I wish to appeal first to, sir, is civics. Great nations are not built by persons doing the mere requirements. They're built by persons going above and beyond the call of their duty. I wish to commend the government for the new format in the presentation of the estimates. Yes, as was opined at some point in time, it may have appeared farcical because of the overwhelming majority. But I hope that if any time in the near or distant future, that's why I gave the option. It's up to you. The situation would change, that you would not renege on that decision to conduct the estimates in that way. What it did was it showcased the aptitude of our technocrats in our various ministries. Those who work assiduously, using the expertise that they've honed over time to make our nation as productive as it can be. Granted, we all know that there may be some or minor pockets of delinquency, and this must be curbed. But even more so, I wish to caution us that political interference can be a hindrance to greater productivity. Political interference can have a deflating effect, even on the most enthusiastic worker. And here, I will not be political. Like my learned colleague, Senator Greenwich, who insisted that he will be political. Indeed, it was the Honourable Prime Minister in her speech a few days ago who intimated her desire to have a system where one need not depend on having to know someone high up to call a shot for you. One need not depend on having to know someone high up to call a shot for you. So too, political interference in the work of the civil service ought to be non-existent. We must go back to the principles of equality and equity with which we embarked upon the journey towards nationhood. I have said that to say that layoffs must not be determined by which administration a person came to work under. Likewise, hiring must not be determined by who one knows or who one is connected to. This nation was built on the principles of social democracy. Each person must have an equal opportunity and the opportunity for an equal share. If we fail to do this, we may very well find, having stayed the course to economic recovery, that we are in no position to capitalize upon it because we are not on a course of social or philosophical development. I'll return to this matter if time permits later, trying not to be political. But at this point in time, I also wish for us to consider our judicial system. When persons exist in a society where it seems as though the mills of justice grind very slowly, and some may even question whether surely, it can lead to frustration. It can lead to persons giving up on the process and taking matters into their own hands. I therefore call upon the government, which has done a lot of work in 10 months, so I know they can work very speedily, to deal with haste the matter of lethargy in our judicial system. Any great nation requires productivity to drive it. And here I wish to speak under the heading of health. I commend the government for expanding the availability of health care with the proposed 24-hour service at the Sir Winston Scott and David Thompson polyclinics. I believe that this will go a long way towards easing the load at the Accident and Emergency Department at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and providing easy access for those who may not have the means to seek private attention at those strange hours of the night, especially when they live in rural areas. However, Mr. President, as the Prime Minister rightly alluded to, we do have a problem with non-communicable diseases. Indeed, just a few short hours before the Prime Minister addressed the nation last Wednesday, a new global ranking identifying the healthiest and unhealthiest countries in the world was published. The Indigo Wellness Index, compiled and led by a Richard Davies at the economic consultancy Bloomberg Economics. It was published in a journal called Global Perspectives. The study is touted to be the most comprehensive of its kind, covering 191 countries. And the countries are ranked based on 10 key measures. 1, healthy life expectancy. 2, blood pressure. 3, blood glucose or diabetes risk. 4, obesity. 5, depression. 6, happiness. 7, alcohol use. 8, tobacco use. 9, inactivity or too little exercise. And 10, government spending on health care. Mr. President, the Indigo Wellness Index ranks Barbados as the 5th unhealthiest country in the world. Of Barbados, it said, "It may seem idyllic, but this Caribbean country had alarming scores across a wide variety of categories, including blood pressure, depression, obesity, inactivity, and binge drinking." If we wish to take any consolation, St. Lucia ranked 2nd. Whether we wish to accept the validity of this study or not, at least we should see it as a wake-up call. A wake-up call that is telling us something not dissimilar to the statistics which Senator Haynes apprised us of yesterday, which suggested that the risk for heart attack in Barbados is 37%, while the acceptable level is 8%. I believe as we stay the course toward economic recovery, we need to get back on course in terms of our social development. Health is intrinsically linked to productivity. I don't know how many of you have ever compared the little clippings on CBC when they're going into crop over calendar or crop over files or something. I watch the crop over files, man. One needs to, sir, I watch what I can afford. When one sees the clippings from the early 80s and compares them with the clippings from the present, you will notice, yes, the 80s had more clothes, but they also had much smaller people. The size of Barbadians in general has increased over the years. And sir, health is a very important issue when we consider the economic development that we are seeking. Because health has a negative impact on economic development on 2 levels, and all at the same time. Poor health results in diminished productivity, therefore less receipts. Poor health also results in increased expenditure on health care. I wish to suggest that this is not a matter solely for the government to consider. We ought to applaud the efforts of the administration to curb childhood obesity with the sugar tax. We also wish to applaud the desire of the administration to begin to monitor local fast food and beverage companies. But, Mr. President, the onus falls on each citizen of this nation, on each head of households in this nation, to regulate themselves. What has changed between the 1970s and 80s and now? We started eating more fast foods, perhaps. Life became a little too hectic. We started eating more processed foods. We perhaps became more affluent and portion sizes increased. I'm sure that those of us of a particular vintage may know the stories when persons would tell you that the chicken stepper was their share of the chicken, because that's all you had. Things have changed a bit. We acquired cars and we walked less. We acquired television and lots of channels, and now devices, and spend more time indoors, and the list goes on. The result is the Indigo Wellness Index, the 5th unhealthiest country of 191 in the world. Mr. President, I am ashamed because I have contributed to that statistic. But I encourage others, as I encourage myself, that we have an obligation to maintain the reputation of this nation as a shining city on the hill. We ought not complain that we cannot eat healthy because prices are too high. It is time for us to get back to the course. Go back to growing what we eat. All of us grew up at a time when there was something planted in the yard. There was a Bonavis tree, there were pigeon peas, you had a couple of yard fowls, and Senator Haynes, we had pigs. If we can get back there and cut back on imported and processed foods, I believe we can make a difference. Consider, we've been going through one of the roughest times economically in the history of this nation. But we've had no drought. We haven't had a famine. The soil still produces. Perhaps what we need to do is to train the taste buds of our children and reorient our taste buds to eat what we grow. There's a story like that in the Bible, sir. When Moses liberated the people from Egypt, he took them into the desert, and they became hungry. God provided quail. He provided manna from heaven. But the people complained. They longed for the flesh pots of Egypt. Could it be a case that in spite of everything that God is providing for us in this land, that we're longing for the flesh pots of the Egypt of processed and imported foods that are doing us no good? I wish to commend under this head of health, though it came under the Ministry of the Maritime and Blue Economy, the ban on plastics. And why I speak to it on the health, sir, is because a lot of the plastic in the ocean is invisible. It's microplastics. Microplastics refers to small pieces of plastic less than 5 millimeters large. And the danger with microplastics at this time is that they have entered the food chain of fish and marine organisms that we consume. We do not yet know what the dangers of that will be. But I believe that under any sun, eating plastic cannot be healthy. And so the ban on plastics is timely, and I wish to commend the administration for that. Mr. President, as I continue this reflection on our desire to stay the course, but our need to get back on course, I wish to touch a bit on the head of education. Education is Barbados' success story. It speaks to the altruistic nature of successive governments in this country. We've seen it around the world. If you want to control a people, the last thing you do is educate them. Our governments have made the conscious decision, as we've done again this year, where education represents the highest expenditure, to educate our people. It is the envy of many. It is one of the things that mesmerized me about this nation. When I came here over 30 years ago, Mr. President, and enrolled in that great institution in St. John, I was shocked. I was shocked when I went for my orientation and they gave me all these books. Lots of books for I think just $70 at the time. That was unheard of where I came from. You had to wait until either an older sibling and hope they had the book, or somebody in the village had the book so that you can get it when you go into that class. Something that pertained here as well. And then they gave me these exercise books and told me when they're written out, you come back and get a new one. I'd never seen anything like that before. Where I grew up, you bought every piece of paper you wrote on. You bought your exercise books. Sometimes you cut them in half to stretch them, if that helped. But then I also recognized that there was a disconnect. While I was mesmerized by what I attained there, for some of my peers it meant nothing. It meant absolutely nothing. They did not recognize the value of what had been offered to them. There was a disconnect. Some were nonchalant. And perhaps because we never emphasized the struggle to gain these things. The message, the story was never told of a time when these things were not available. And so I had the opportunity to watch during the Lee Cooper era. This was the time when all the boys wanted a Lee Cooper bag on their back. Mostly yellow and black and orange and black, and sometimes they would have absolutely nothing in them. And then I watched it progress where the bags got smaller and smaller to the point where they couldn't hold books. I've highlighted this, Mr. President, to say we must get back on course. We must tell the story. We must emphasize to the youth of this nation the invaluable asset they have in free education. Free in the sense that, built on the principles of socialism, if we are to get back on course, we need to accentuate the fundamentals of social democracy upon which this nation was built, where every generation is indebted to the one before and obligated to the one that comes after. There can be no break in the chain. There can be no lapse. If staying the course and the economic viability we hope for is to be truly appreciated and propel this nation, we cannot drop the baton in any generation. Education, therefore, it must be emphasized, is not really free. Education is a sacrifice that each generation makes for the other. Education is a sacrifice that each generation makes for the other. But sir, while I speak of education, there is a link between education and transport at this time. I know that we have heard much about the raise in school fees in bus fare. And while I understand the raise and the need for the raise, I also believe that persons should receive a service commensurate with what they're being charged. But we leave it there. I'll just encourage the government to get the buses here as soon as possible. But where education is linked to transportation, sir, is in the lack of transport of some children in our nation on evenings. I had a chat with a principal of a rural secondary school. I wouldn't mention which school because I have not asked his permission. But he was telling me that sometimes the children of that school, some who have to catch 2 buses, are there at 7 o'clock at night because the bus hasn't come. And sometimes a private citizen has to take them in their car to a place where they can get their connecting bus. That is unfair to those children. By the time they get home, after 9 or 10, they have no time to reflect on homework. They have no time to do the things that students would normally do. It's just time to sleep and get up to the grind of the next day. That is not good enough in our nation. And while we understand there's a shortage of buses, I believe that every child in this nation should have an equal opportunity. If not, we cannot measure them by the same yardstick. Neither can we treat them in the same way. That being said, I wish to commend the government on restoring the availability of free tertiary education to all in Barbados. I say this, however, though I believe there will need to be a rethink and reconsideration of the sustainability of this measure. Sustainability in the sense that I believe government will at some point in time have to start determining what type of degrees it would want its people doing in the interest of national development. Okay. I also wish to commend the Prime Minister, though she mentioned it in passing, on the proposal of middle school. Middle school in the sense that there's provided a second plank for children. The common entrance exam, for all its beauty, and I cannot find anything better than it at this point in time, can also have the negative effect of rendering some children failures at a time in their life when they do not even know what is going on. And so the concept of middle school where children can develop and have another opportunity to look at where they can go is a very good concept. It's a very exciting concept, which I hope to hear more about later. Because those of us who have taught for some time would recognize that not all children develop at the same time. I remember in my school in St. Kitts, There was a young man when he was in third form could hardly spell egg. We didn't know anything about dyslexia or any of those things in that time. We just thought he was dunce. But by the time he got into fifth form, he got 9 A's at GCE. Something clicked. And so I want us to look at the system so that every child can have a fair share. Every child can have a fair opportunity and not be rendered a failure for one bad day in their lives. I believe I join with all educators in commending the government for the proposed remuneration of educators based on qualifications. I believe that this is a good initiative, and I can see it having the potential of bringing some of our bright sparks into the teaching profession for the development of our people. I've always wondered or found it fascinating that teachers train all the professionals in this country and yet do not gain the respect that they ought to get. I believe this is a step in the right direction. Mr. President, it would be remiss of me if I spoke on this occasion and didn't speak to the current affairs, state of affairs in our country where crime and violence is concerned. The prevalence of guns in our society continues to be a bothersome issue. And the question has been asked over and over, where have these guns come from? I believe that the Prime Minister's initiative and the government's initiative to have more scanners in the port may give us a hint. But I always remember, and I have to quote Calypso again, a Calypso in the mid-1990s by Edwin Yearwood, something greater than we. And he said something to this effect. The mind's description of drug pushers make them out to look just like we. But can drugs slip into a tight system without any authority? Those small fries like we distributing it and taking life without mercy. Take a good look through any system here. Do we look like authority? In the 21st century, 2019, we can replace drugs with guns. We see the young perpetrators, but who are the people putting these things into their hands? It is true that persons will say they've never seen a gun shoot itself. But if we have a system where our young people have not received the kind of guidance and the kind of nurturing that is necessary to help them to understand their place in this society, if we have drifted from the course that made this nation great, what we may well be seeing is that those at the lower level of the society who do not yet have the ability to mask it, just playing out the attitudes that the whole society has. And so I wish to publicly make an apology, sir, to all the young boys and young girls out there whom I have failed either by my action or inaction. And what is happening in our society is nothing new. Societies do go adrift. The prophet Isaiah, as he began his work, reflected on the society that had gone adrift in Judah. He said, "The princes are thieves. They take bribes." And as he reflected on his society, he said, even the animals know better than the people. The ox knows its owner, and the ass its master's crib. But my people do not know. My people do not understand. But then he offered hope. The hope that I'm offering the young men and young women in our society. To put down the guns, put down the weapons, and come let us reason together. Come let us reason together. Come let us get back on course. I really pray, sir, that as we experience the economic development that we're seeking in this country, running alongside that can be the social, philosophical, and cultural development that is necessary to make sense of that economic growth. With that, I wish to caution the members of government side. Be careful about touting your success too early. I believe the learned and senior statesman, Senator Greenidge, warned us about this yesterday. The Honourable Prime Minister highlighted this in her speech last Wednesday. She reminded us, as a small open economy, Barbados is vulnerable to the vagaries of the international economy, including a slowdown in global growth, Brexit, rising oil prices, and increasing political instability next door in Venezuela that could also serve to boost oil prices. And on top of these challenges, we have to deal with the unwarranted listing of Barbados by the EU as an uncooperative jurisdiction on tax matters. I've highlighted that to make the point. Do not find yourselves having a George W. Bush moment on the USS Abraham Lincoln by declaring mission accomplished, only to find that a decade later, he was in a worse state. We must be mindful that we live in a region known for travel advisories and airport downgrades when we do not agree with certain groups on international policies. And at this time in the 21st century, our desire to get back on course, to reconnect ourselves to the social, philosophical, and cultural underpinnings that made this nation great, the things that lead to self-actualization, can be construed as hostile in a world where international bullying has become commonplace. We must also remember, as one whom I alluded to earlier spoke of nations like ours in derogatory terms, that we live in a world that has an economic taxonomy that divides one small part of the world into the first world and tells the rest of us, you're third world and you're developing. But there's a shift in goalposts. That every time you think you're getting there, it moves again. I believe Senator Nurse warned us about this yesterday when he sang the first line of the dirge. We may well be seeing the end of the international business sector. we may well be seeing the end of the international business sector. But I encourage us, as the Honourable Prime Minister encouraged us, stay the course. It will be tough. We have to tough times call for tough measures. But let us also get back on course. Get back on course and realign ourselves to those principles that made us stand out as a shining beacon on the hill. Get back to those principles that made us stand out as one of the greatest democracies on earth. With these words, I thank you very much.
Senator Adams, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I begin my remarks, it struck me over the past couple of days just what a diversity of expertise we have in this chamber. And it's a rich diversity. It's a pleasure listening to the other senators expound. And I think this debate has been particularly representative of that. Unfortunately, it always means I have to change some of my remarks because other people cover them or they raise points that I think need expanding on. So I'll try and weave those into what I'm going to say. And what I want to speak to today is growth, how this appropriations bill ties into growth. I think it's part of a larger strategy that hasn't been given the full recognition in the public, and I say that because we hear questions about it in here. I listened to Senator Nurse's presentation yesterday. He has questions on growth, and in the broader public sphere also. And growth, the word, has taken on this slightly mystical connotation. What is it? No one seems to want to actually define it. Well, we did have a debate in here some months ago where I suggested that growth broadly comes from three sources. One is an expansion of the number of hours worked. That's basically employment. We want more people employed. Two is an increase in capital investments, and that should be fairly obvious. And three are gains in productivity. Now, those typically are the sources of where growth comes from. But in our context, it's not just enough to say that's the source of growth and it's just going to happen. We happen to be in a precarious position because of the debt that we've been accumulating over the last 10 years. And it is the case that there are very, very few cases of nations who successfully extinguished or got their debt to a manageable level just through growth. You know, I've searched for this, and it's taken some searching. The last example I can find is Swaziland in 1985, where they managed it. And their context was a little bit different from ours because their debt was nearly all external. Now, typically what happens to get back on track, to borrow a phrase, is that there is a combination of debt forgiveness, debt restructuring, debt rescheduling of obligations, alongside measures that encourage those three sources of growth. And an example closer to home of that would be Jamaica. Jamaica had a period of debt reduction in the early 1990s. I think it was 90 to 93, where their debt to GDP ratio dropped from 125% to 95%. But nearly all of that was attributable to negotiations that they had both with the World Bank and what was called the Paris Club at the time. In more recent years, they've again adopted that strategy of looking for growth, but also seeking to renegotiate their debt position. So there are echoes of this in what has happened in Barbados over the last 10 months. But part of the danger, if I mention Jamaica, it's not to pick on them. They're currently probably the second best performing economy in the Caribbean after Grenada, I think. But they've gone to that well several times. This is our first time in this position. And I don't think it's one that anybody really wants to go back to. So if you have repeated debt renegotiations, typically investors will say, there's some red flags here. What's going on? Is there underlying mismanagement of the economy that is causing government after government to go back to the well? We don't want that to happen. Now, sometimes there are external factors that can drive that. We live in a hurricane zone. If a hurricane comes through here, 3 hurricanes in a season, we're done. We have to go and renegotiate debt, ask for debt forgiveness. And we've seen that in other territories already. And there are other external factors. And here I'm going to take a small excursion, thanks to Senator Wiggins, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, the EU, and more specifically the European Commission, who have self-appointed themselves extrajudicial vigilantes in the international tax arena and have targeted, they shift the goalposts, as we've said, over and over again. Now, what is curious is you have a commissioner like Pierre Moscovici, who leads up this initiative, who announces a blacklist and is extremely triumphalist on social media, doesn't engage the comments he gets. But there's a lot of backslapping, and they present themselves as the knights in shining armor for fair taxation. Now, they've shifted the definition of what fair taxation is so often as to render it an absolutely meaningless term. And it's reminiscent of political gerrymandering, when people change the electoral boundaries to ensure that their supporters are in that constituency. And then when there's an election or a referendum, they make a general appeal to act in the spirit of democracy. Well, it just does not happen that way. And there is an extra piece to what the EU is doing, more specifically, again, the European Commission, is that it is the case that whenever one member state of those 28 has brought action against a company in another of those member states, or against each other, those cases have been heard before the European Court of Justice. Not once has the European Court of Justice upheld any argument against a low taxation competitive argument that has been brought by another member state. Not once. So what the European Commission and the European Union cannot impose at home, and the European Court of Justice has said repeatedly when these cases have been brought that they are a violation of the Treaty of Rome. There are 4 freedoms that underpin that: freedom of free movement of goods, services, people, and capital. They have always ruled against those cases. Yet we have now Commissioner Moscovici promoting abroad what he cannot achieve at home. And it was a pleasure yesterday in the car to hear our ambassador to CARICOM, Mr. Commichon, very eloquently setting out what CARICOM intends to do in response to this. And it is, much as Senator Wiggins most emotionally and eloquently set out, to stand up and fight, but to fight on logical grounds, not on any kind of emotional grounds. Those external factors, they're beyond our control, so leave those to one side. If we want to achieve growth under those 3 headings that I set out earlier, and we don't want to be recidivist, we don't want to come back here at some point in the future, well, we have to look very carefully, and the word restructuring was used by Senator Rogers a moment ago. We have to look very carefully at what got us here in the first place. And I don't propose to open up the political part of that, because certainly that's a huge factor involved. But there are other structural impediments that we have that have existed for a long time that make it difficult to have a sustainable pattern of growth. I'll give you one example. There are many, but I'll give you one example. Is we have a situation where government has traditionally been the dominant actor in our economy, and it crowds out private sector investment. I'd make the argument that investment by the private sector actually causes a higher quality of growth than the situation where the public sector is dominant. And one symptom in support of that assertion is that we've got $9 billion worth of savings sitting in our banking system. That's private savings. It has nowhere to go. What do you do to unlock that? That is almost 2 years worth of GDP. If you had a way to unlock that, many of the problems we're talking about, be they physical or spiritual health, be they strictly economic or financial, they start to look a lot more soluble, if I put it that way, solvable also. So what kind of thing can you do? Now, that is not to minimize the importance of the public sector, there's a capital works program, a road works program worth $100 million. That speaks directly to one of those sources of growth I just outlined, capital investment. Where the government acts to develop a public good, that makes perfect sense. It's not something the private sector is going to do. But where it is so dominant, it's crowding out avenues of investment the private sector would probably undertake, there's a problem. And furthermore, the government has become the largest single customer of many actors in the private sector, which is not, strictly from a diversity point of view, the healthiest place to be. Now, the good news in talking about structural impediments is that we're no longer acting under an economic regime that I describe as fiscal kamikazeism. You know, that has been put to one side. We don't believe, for example, that the NIS is some sort of financial tooth fairy, which will slowly and gently remove a government IOU from under the pillow and magically transmute it into cash without, we were told, any kind of consequence. That is out of the way, and what we're left with is the reality that growth is dependent on sound public finances, and sustainable growth is dependent on that same foundation of sound public finance, but also on structural changes that make sure we don't have to go back to this well, that we're not recidivist. Now, this raises some questions as to what is the role of government. And again, many senators have touched on points I think are very important, you know, as promoting health, promoting education. These are public goods that you can't count on the private sector in a small nation like ours to undertake. Spiritual aspects are tied up in that. A government has to decide, does it want to be at this end of the extreme where it absolutely dominates the economic hinterland, or does it want to cast itself more in the role as an enabler, almost a light touch, an entrepreneur of light touch, but at the state level. And I think we need to move towards that direction a lot more. And this really does mean removing some of the structural obstacles that have been built up over the years, and some of them are more recent than others. Senator Springer spoke at some length. I'm sure Mr. President and Mr. Deputy President might say maybe at too much length, but I thought it was a good presentation about the importance of education, tertiary education, as well as a public good and as a driver of growth. If I go back to my list, if you want to drive more hours worked in an economy as a growth factor, that comes down to educating and improving your human capital. It's absolutely key. So when the government makes tertiary education free once again, it ties directly into one of these categories of growth that I've spoken about, and it removes a structural impediment that previously had been placed there somewhat inexplicably. But there are other initiatives also. National Training and Jobs First initiatives. They're in the same vein. Ties into growth. It's not just something that was thought up with no coherence to the rest of what's going on. We control the debt and we start to put in place some of these structures that will make growth sustainable. Another one that I'm not sure has been given enough airing is measures to make the Central Bank of Barbados more independent, not fully independent, but such that it does not wait on the beck and call of the Minister of Finance to up a debt ceiling, for example. You put in legislation that stops that kind of abuse. I think I can say that in here. That's a fair word for what happened. Similarly, and both that measure and the next one, which is limits on how far a Minister of Finance can grant a tax concession or a tax incentive, these tie into capital investment and growth. If you are transparent and investors know they are going to be treated equally in the eyes of the law, that encourages capital flows. If you have a hotel come in, and whatever the circumstances are, we can argue all about it, but they gain tax concessions and incentives that really put them in a very advantageous position compared to the rest of the sector, you're not really doing yourself a service in terms of sustainable long-term growth. Another one on capital as a source of growth, capital investment, is the convergence of the corporate tax rate. And again, I'm going to have to say a couple of things about the EU again here. Now, we've undertaken this, and before I get into there, I did watch Senator Nurse's presentation yesterday. I did hear that line of the dirge. I don't remember him singing it. I'm going to have to go back and watch the video again. But we get these kind of threats by the EU and in the past by the OECD. And yes, it does make you wonder, is there a future in this kind of tax competition for somewhere like Barbados? I think it's worth fighting for it. I have the same reservation. They're going to keep on switching the goalposts. It's a source of revenue, and that was the spirit, I think, behind the convergence of the tax rates. Now, there is some research sympathetic to what the European Union has done, but it's worth quoting their data. This is a paper, it's called The Missing Profits of Nations. I think it was published in the last 4 or 5 months. And the authors reckon that $600 billion worth of profit is shifted onshore to offshore every year. 97 billion ends up in the Caribbean. That's 97 is 600 billion. The European Union has companies that shift about 210, 215 billion dollars worth of cash a year. 80% of that goes from one EU member country to another, notably the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Ireland, Malta. So when they announce these kind of initiatives and they target people like us, and you have Commissioner Moscovici triumphantly announcing success and everyone is playing fear, they're actually talking about $20, $25 billion of what they're losing, when about 170 is sitting within their own borders. Again, they're unable to achieve at home their desires, and they seek to impose that through force in a way that is contrary to sovereign law, in a way that's contrary even to multilateral negotiations on the rest of us. It's a travesty. I find it utterly grotesque, to tell you the absolute truth. Similarly, another policy to get back onto growth and changing the structures. This debate that we've had, for example, when the VAT, not to specify the online part of it, but VAT as opposed to direct taxation. What is the right balance? What are we trying to achieve here? When you lower direct taxation, what you're really doing is looking at this calculus of work versus leisure. You want to incentivize work. You lower direct taxation, you're incentivizing people to work. One of the sources of growth, the number of hours worked in an economy, the number of people employed, that speaks directly to that. And as an aside, indirect taxation is more flexible, generally more efficient, and harder to actually avoid. It's not a perfect system. I can remember Senator Drake saying it's regressive. There are elements of regressiveness in it, but very often these are mitigated depending on what you exempt from VAT, what is not applied, or it's a basket of foodstuffs or what have you. Another policy over the last 10 months that ties into this appropriations bill and the theme of growth is relaxation of foreign exchange controls. Again, this talks directly to capital investment. It's absolutely key. People are worried that it's going to lead to capital flight. I look at it slightly differently, in the same way that the peg has ended up serving as almost like a training rod. When you have a young plant, you're trying to train it to grow, you've got this peg right here. It prevents politics making the plant go a different direction. If you have this idea of a steady relaxation of foreign exchange controls, you are putting a lot of responsibility on the policymakers to ensure that you don't do something reckless that absolutely pushes that in jeopardy. And I think the government is very, very cognizant of that. You know, controls impede foreign direct investment, and to some degree they encourage evasion in that some transactions will take place offshore that you would rather have onshore. I'm going to come, I think, to one of my personal favorites, and that's digitization that Senator Nurse spoke to and has been touched on in several places here. Digitization speaks directly to another source of growth, that is productivity. Productivity is just output divided by input. If you can reduce the input, you increase the result of this numerator and denominator. They're different, and it can affect both ends of that equation, to tell the truth. Now, I have to say, Senator Nurse, I think, became happiest when he was talking about digitization, and specifically the benefits for audit, which I understand as a finance professional. It enables you to track things better, and I concur 100% of that. Senator Franklin, I should probably wait for him to come back to his seat before I say this, but I won't. He came in here today, and he was clutching a large manila envelope. There it is, right there, without the contents, and it was rolled up. And I said to him, that looks like you have cash in there. And he said, yeah, he does have cash, and he explained the reasoning for it. It was legitimate. But this goes into a digitization conversation, because when you have efforts to digitize payments, for example, or reduce the amount of cash in an economy, that is a huge driver of productivity and a reducer of cost in your economy. There are a raft of there's a body of research behind this. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, the Bank of England, also, for instance, the Fed research says that if you are able to substitute a third of the paper notes and coins in your economy for digital cash, you can expect a permanent increase in your rate of growth of 3 percentage points. You're floating around at 0 to 1% at the moment. If you manage to substitute 30% of your notes and coins with digital, you could push that growth rate up 3 points. That's tremendous. And in a place with an informal economy, according to the IDB, that represents about a third of the recognized economy, that is to say about 1.5 billion US dollars, that's dominated in cash. There are quite a few ways you can imagine that digitizing the economy does a bunch of things, actually. It's, again, Senator Franklin, I wish he was here. I listened to his contribution yesterday. I know there's quite a lot about people who don't pay VAT. Well, if it's digitized, it's far harder for you to escape that type of taxation. It also helps in other ways. Carrying cash is expensive, not to harp on Senator Franklin, but if he walks around with that envelope, manila envelope, wrapped up and protruding cash, he is some thieves walking pension plan. He doesn't want to be in that position. So there are many savings that you can extract through digitization. Typically, the total operating cost of a retail business, when it comes to the cost of cash, are 5 to 15% of their total cost. So the more that you can digitize an economy, the greater the savings that you can have. And it extends further than that. There are costs of convenience. I don't want to start bashing the banks, but you get in a car, you go down to a bank to draw out your cash. Well, there's a cost to that. There's a cost in terms of convenience and in terms of time. And as you would expect, somebody somewhere has studied this. Some people calculate that the time per month spent doing that is 20 minutes. That's 20 minutes in your car, in a bus, getting down to a bank just to pull out your money. Now, over a lifetime, that translates into about 2 weeks to a month. Just traveling to get your cash. Now, suppose you could do that whole process digitally. The productivity gains are self-evident. Some may have seen that other countries are actually putting their money, so to speak, where their mouths are. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank intends to reduce the amount of cash in its economy by 50% over 4 years. These are pretty big numbers, and it's no accident, I think, that the governor of the ECCB is a Grenadian. And I'll come on to that in just a moment, because the next policy after digitalization is the Fiscal Responsibility Act, I think was debated and passed in December. I haven't heard much about that in the press. That's a tremendous plank in the plan to structurally change an economy such that you don't have to go back to the well if you run into trouble again. This imposes limits on and targets on what a government can achieve. Now, if I mentioned Timothy Antoine a moment ago, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, he said to me, we had this conversation where he said, make sure you get that kind of legislation on the act. And he was speaking as someone who was effectively the financial secretary and PS in Grenada, who had the job of operationally managing the government's finances. Now, that is different from sitting on high and saying, do this, do that. And he said the passage of that legislation in Grenada was a huge, huge benefit to the country. And we can see that in some of the numbers. I saw just 2 days ago, I think it's the CDB, said that for the second year running, Grenada is the fastest growing economy in the Caribbean, 4.5% growth this year. I think it was over 5% last year. Their debt to GDP level, 60%. Their primary surplus as a percentage of GDP, 5.5%. Now, it's not just a fiscal responsibility act. It's one of several things designed to change the structure such that it enables growth. It promotes capital flows, it promotes productivity, and it promotes employment. Those are the three places growth ends up coming from. There's more that's happened in Barbados also. I'm slightly hesitant to describe it as structural. I hope it is the change in attitude towards state-owned enterprises and the amount of transfers that were going to that group of quangos, quasi-autonomous government organizations. They were hemorrhaging, and now we more or less, in the private sector parlance, have a fix it, close it, or sell it attitude there, strictly to shrink those kind of transfers. That, I'd like to call that a structural change. I'm not entirely sure. The jury may be a little out on that at the moment. Overall, these measures alongside a budget appropriations bill like this are trying to do more than just balance or reduce debt. They are trying to structurally change an economy to promote growth, again, through those three paths that I identified. And all in the context, which Senator Rogers eloquently spoke to, of getting back to a social partnership, social justice, cohesion, moving away from a situation where, personally, I felt this, that the social fabric of the country was in danger of being rent completely. It's not an easy thing to do from where we are. But I would submit that alongside the economic policies, alongside the re-emphasis on health, which is a budget that has risen. If you listen to Senator Haynes yesterday, that's true. And education, similarly. Those are measures that are designed not just to make the balance sheet or the P&L look better, but to get back to a situation where we all partake in the healthy development of the country. I'd just like to finish up, because you would expect government senators to stand up and say these kind of things, that everything is great. And I wish Senator Tate were in her chair, because I said that to her yesterday. Whenever I speak, she says it's like, you know, being soothed, everything will be fantastic. I hope so. But I have to say I agree with Senator Rogers. It is very early to say it's a job done. That is not my conclusion. But before I do conclude, what do other people think? And more appropriately, what do financial professionals who pay very close attention to this thing? I'm not saying they are the final word in are we on the right path or not, but I think it's indicative. So, as you know, people like KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte, and PwC, after every budget they issue a report. It would surprise me if you haven't read them all. But there was one quote here from a partner at Deloitte, beg your pardon, at KPMG. It's a lengthy one, but he says, over the last 10 months, a number of initiatives have been implemented from an economic perspective. The debt restructuring has been very significant with regard to reducing the interest expense burden. It will be critical for the government to continue on its path of digitization of the economy, as this will not only propel Barbados's competitive index, but also bring a number of efficiencies to larger infrastructure projects. So that is not me. That is the professionals who look at these things pretty carefully. And I've got a more succinct one also that I like, and I think Senator Rogers will appreciate also, because it's got a nice little opening quote. So this is PwC, and their report was entitled Back from the Brink. And I think that chimes in with stay the course and get back on course. And they say, I'm only going to read one sentence. In a relatively short period, much has been achieved. I could go on, but I'm aware I've got limited time, and the much that they've achieved is actually quite a long list. According to them, I'm trying to synthesize. So all in all, I don't plan to spend a great deal of more time on this. I say this appropriations bill is part of a greater plan, and it's a plan that ties in specifically to how you can achieve growth. Growth is not mystical, it's not mysterious. There are only a limited number of ways it can occur. And the policies that have been put in place, concurrent or prior, or those that will follow this appropriations bill, all speak to that in one way or another. That's to say, the promotion of employment and hours worked, the encouragement of capital flows, be they foreign direct investment or that $9 billion tied up in private savings. And of course, efforts to be more productive. Digitization has touched 7 government departments so far. We're really at the phase of implementing and execution. That is the most difficult, and it's another reason to be cautious, and not to say it's a job well done. But the intent is there, the plans are well defined, and personally I think that the job for growth has started. It's not finished, but it's started really pretty well. And with that, sir, I thank you. I'm obliged.
Mr. President, I beg that this sitting be suspended for approximately 15 minutes, and we could return at
20 past.
about 20 past, sir.
Question is that we now suspend our proceedings for 20 minutes. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. We are now in suspension until 20 past 5.